Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller here, along with Robert Glasscock, and we are going to talk about 2023. I know, this is the time of year. If you're listening to this in real time, we're recording this in December 2023. It's the time when we all pontificate on the year past and project the year ahead and this kind of thing. Well, astrology gives us a great lens to do that with. So we thought we would spend a little bit of time here focusing on 2023 from the perspective of three planets, three slower-moving outer planets in 2023 are changing signs. Well, one already has, Jupiter, but we'll mention that. It actually does it again in 2023. So we're going to talk about Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, and what themes in our lives we should be looking for as they change signs, all right? We're not going to talk about the mundane. We're going to talk about specifically you, me, your family, your pet, Robert, etc. What are we likely to experience in 2023?
Well, before we start with Jupiter, I just would like to address one of the reasons why we do these looks at the year ahead at this time of year is because this is the time of year when the entire world celebrates or worships the winter solstice. And I'll explain what that is briefly. You know, from the fall equinox on, which is Libra, the sun appears to go below the equator further and further, 1 degree per day, further and further south of the equator until on December the 22nd every year, the sun appears to stop. It doesn't go 1 degree further south. It doesn't go 1 degree further north. It stops in the vicinity of the Southern Cross constellation for 3 days. It stops and is buried in its tomb below the equator for 3 days. And on December the 25th of every year, the sun appears to rise 1 degree. It's a miracle. Life is renewed and reborn at this time of the year every year. And as the sun rises 1 degree per year, finally at the vernal equinox, we have historically the flooding of the Nile, which brings all of that fertile silt back into the Nile Valley and renews plant life and animal life and so on. So there is the entire symbolism of what we now call Christianity today. That birth, since no one really knows the time or day of birth of Jesus Christ, that was the date that was picked to symbolize that. And I also want to dispel a kind of, I think, common misunderstanding a lot of people have about astrology and the signs of the zodiac, and why the outer planets moving into new signs like Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto are about to do. Why that ingress into a new sign is collectively so important, not just to individuals, but to everybody worldwide. We're talking about from beggars to heads of entire nations, and even the Earth's biosphere, including factors like tectonic plates and volcanoes. So, to start with, the signs don't project any magic rays that affect everybody on Earth. The signs and the constellations have always simply been markers for planetary seasons as perceived on Earth, a kind of shorthand that encompasses a lot of information. So when we say that somebody is an Aries, we're looking at somebody whose birth coincides with the vernal equinox season, which we call spring, and everything that's connected with that season. The beginning of the warming of the earth and the beginning of the renewal of life on the earth. Inspiration, optimism, hope, new beginnings. And we still celebrate the vernal equinox today, just like we did 6,000 years ago. from Druids and pagans and Wiccans at Stonehenge to Christians at Easter and Muslims with the Nowruz in the Middle East, just as we still celebrate the equally ancient veneration of the winter solstice at Christmas and Hanukkah. So astrology divides the seasons on Earth into 12, not 4 seasons. Astrology recognizes 2 intermediate seasonal archetypes between the standard spring, summer, fall, and winter. So when major planets from Jupiter on out ingress into new signs for periods of varying durations, depending on their orbits, the message of the stars describes major new planetary seasons on Earth, which are complex orbital and cyclical interrelationships or angles that involve the Earth, the planets, and the sun. And these planetary seasons can last anywhere from a year, in the case of Jupiter, in each sign, to 2.5 years for Saturn, to Pluto's unique elliptical orbit that spends from 12 to 31 years in a sign, depending. So right now, for example, we have Jupiter entering Aries for its last lap through the sign of the Ram, which it will be in Aries until mid-May, the 16th, as you said, of 2023, this coming May, when Jupiter will enter Taurus, the bull, where it remains until May 24th of 2024. So you may be able to correlate Jupiter's re-entry into Aries from now through next spring with taking something to the next level that you began about 9 months ago, last spring, around May, perhaps. It was a new project or an idea or a job or a new career.
A new
as
podcast.
Well as do what?
A new podcast.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Interesting. Because part of this transit of Jupiter entering Aries is an inner and spiritual journey that's still unfolding and growing and becoming more rewarding financially and more fulfilling emotionally and even spiritually. And that thing, that project, that new beginning that started probably back last spring is now, well, in 2023, about to stabilize on this new level with Jupiter in Taurus and become more permanent starting this coming May. So you want to consider the house in your chart where Aries falls on the cusp, because those house matters will figure strongly in the nature and process of whatever this new growth cycle is. And this is Taurus, the sign of the builder, remember. So one message of the stars right now is to follow that inspiration or that new venture from earlier in 2022 and add yet more new ideas to develop it further between now and next spring, with an idea to turning those ideas into greater tangible realities in 2023. So we are all transitioning from a stage of coming up with great new original ideas and entering the stage of practical implementation, concentrating on whatever important actual work is necessary to produce these next level results. And all of this can involve things like writing, the internet and media, publishing or audiobooks, teaching, marketing and advertising, creating podcasts, as you just mentioned, or YouTube channels. All of this with the aim of your product or your service reaching a wider audience. And travel and people at a distance can also be connected with what you're doing or with the goals that you're setting for 2023. So the Jupiter season is on your side from now through mid-May of 2023, which means don't procrastinate too much in taking full advantage of Jupiter in Venus-ruled Taurus next year, which is, of course, the sign of talents, love and romance, the arts, creativity, money, and security. And you stand to gain through all of those things with Jupiter's blessing from May 23 through May of 24.
I love this. I love this placement. It is so cool. Yay, Jupiter. Thank you for rolling in. I mean, I celebrated its time in Pisces together with Neptune, but it is time to move on. Hey, let's talk next about Saturn, because as Jupiter left Pisces, there's a little bit of a void. Now, Neptune is still there until eventually 2026, but Saturn now is going to leave Aquarius and move into Pisces. That happens on March 7th, 2023, where it will be for basically 2 years.
Yeah, until February of 26, almost 3 years. It's amazing.
So Saturn's characteristics in Pisces, what does that look like?
Well, transiting Saturn by house in your chart, wherever you have Pisces and Aquarius, rather, in Pisces, because Saturn's about to go into Pisces. Wherever you have that in your house, that's where you have to be responsible. Saturn has a bad reputation, the greater malefic, and so on. It isn't. It simply means responsibility, being responsible to your own talents, to your own goals, disciplined enough to do the work necessarily involved to make them happen, and so on, where you have to be patient and organized and disciplined, where you have to be an adult and behave like a professional, or seek professionals if you can't perform something yourself. So you look to that house where Saturn is transiting, entering Pisces. So it's going to be in Pisces from March 23 until February of 26. Now think about this. Saturn rules the bones and the skeleton in the body. So Saturn is the framework and structure behind and supporting every form of accomplishment in the physical world. And it affects your ambition, or your lack or fear of ambition. It affects your status in life and the face that you present professionally or through your work. It affects the way you parent and nurture yourself, your loved ones, your talents, your longings, your goals, or where you fail to parent and nurture those things. Again, depending on Saturn's house position and its aspects at birth and so on. So the nature of the Pisces season for any planet is to dissolve outmoded or archaic belief patterns connected with whatever planetary archetype is passing through this incredibly deep, unconscious, and profoundly spiritual sign of Pisces. And Saturn rules all authority figures and governments, transiting Pisces, so we are witnessing the slow global collapse of tribalism, really, in a world that is now, for the first time in human civilization, totally interconnected and interdependent on the internet for everything from business and banking to hospitals, law enforcement, militaries, transportation, utilities, you name it. So these things are forcing us to think globally and collectively and consciously. And so the whole world is feeling increasingly uncertain and confused and anxious and worried. And we're going to feel this even more than we already do today. And so what we're looking at is this ancient us-them, win-lose dichotomy about othering, which has its corollary in the opposite, belonging. That's what we are moving into, belonging. Belonging does not insist that we are all the same. It simply means that we recognize and celebrate our differences, where we, the people, includes all the people. So what we are having to do is figure out a way to create bridges across these artificial differences, really. Because when we bridge, then we not only open up to others, we also open up to change in ourselves. And we actively begin to participate in co-creating a society in which we can all belong. So on a personal level, well, we can still try to understand this message of the stars, I think, from Saturn's perspective. And the first and foremost of this is to hang on and develop our critical thinking. which depends on informing and educating yourself to determine what's true, and then to arrive at choices and actions that combat this othering with belonging, not promoting divisive ties and promoting indoctrination or propaganda, but to combine that critical thinking with Pisces' inherent emotional compassion and empathy for the less advantaged and for those who are suffering. And here you have to fall back on do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's way more than just a biblical phrase from Luke. It really summarizes the heart of metaphysics and karma, I think. Whatever you do to others, you do to yourself. And if you withhold help or deny your connectedness with others, then you rob yourself of belonging. With all of the detriments to your health and security and your love relationships and even your group support, which increases your isolation and your fear and your anxiety and your paranoia, and also increases the susceptibility to authoritarianism. So how do you treat people on a day-to-day basis? Do you recognize what you have in common with everybody else, or do you unconsciously demonize others in ways large and small so that you can feel superior to them? And this is what Saturn's passage through Pisces says. Consciously restructure your approach to living by incorporating the higher meanings of Pisces' compassion and its sense of belonging so that you can bridge the passing away of these ancient tribal beliefs and boundaries in your daily life. So broadly speaking, for people, it feels like healthcare and healing or medicine or therapy or social services or nonprofits or religious and spiritual fields, the arts and creativity, transpersonal psychology, archaeology, the sciences, including political science, all of these things are Piscean avenues toward constructive evolution. And if you participate in any of those areas, even slightly, much less as a chosen career direction, that participation on your part can go far, ultimately, in changing everyone with whom you come in contact for the better, thus helping heal the human race from the consequences of Pisces' negative archetypes, like debasement and pollution and deceit and crime. So at its core, Saturn in Pisces, which comes along every 29 and a half years, it's meant to help you discover your inner personal connection with God or the all that is, whatever you like to call this, rather than merely parroting what self-anointed religious authorities claim is the word of God. Because when you can reconnect directly with that, with the universal consciousness, then your relationship with consciousness no longer depends on tithing a middleman to tell you what God is or how to behave. And these next 3 years are really a golden opportunity for all of us to do exactly that. Discover and incorporate your growing experience of higher consciousness and see the results throughout your life. So the house where the natal house, rather, where Saturn is transiting Pisces, that's going to be your personal key to the areas and the people in your life where you can implement this growing insight and realize the greatest, I think, self-transformative effects in your own life. And that maybe brings us up to Pluto.
That gets us to Pluto. Wow, what a great description of that. So many nuances. You know, when you talk about Pisces and Neptune, I mean, you can go talk about the coin having two sides. There are so many ways we can go on that. But let's talk about Pluto, because this is the theme builder for the next 2 decades that sticks its toe into Aquarius in March 23. Actually, it's March 23rd of 2023. That's an easy one to remember. Hey, Robert, when does Pluto move into Aquarius? It's March 23rd of 2023. Just knock it down right there. Boom, 3/23/23. It never gets past 0 degrees, though. So are we, seeing some of Pluto wanting to be in Aquarius now? And what do you think we'll see there for those couple of just 3 months or so that it's in there in 2023?
Well, this is the transition. This is monumental. The transition from Pluto entering Aquarius, it dips back into Capricorn in June of 23 next year. And then it goes direct in late Capricorn in October of 23. And then it finally enters Aquarius for good in January of 24, where it remains through January of 44. So if you look at this in the past, Pluto has spent the last 18 years in Capricorn, which is the sign of authorities and governments and of competition and status and othering. Capricorn's very much about, I'm the boss, you're the employee. And Pluto's death and rebirth archetype passing through Capricorn, Pluto's energy of deep-rooted factors rising to the surface to overturn or overthrow and then rebuild anew, those energies have already utterly transformed existing governments around the world and made us finally face the fact that we are one human race on one planet with one ecosystem that we all share and that we all affect, for good or ill. This whole idea of separate nations is dying, and it scares people because that's all we've known. So this is what Pluto's transit through Aquarius forecasts, basically between now and 2044. Aquarius is the sign of humanity, a collective sign of all humanity. It's also an air sign, the intellect, reason, rationality. It's also a sign of science. Now, when Aquarius is afflicted, then Aquarian scientists of science can be destructive, like nuclear and biochemical warfare, as well as electronic remote weapons of mass destruction and so on. And Aquarius is also the sign of both ancient and very cutting-edge science and philosophy, so that we're witnessing a resurgence of interest in ancient spiritual and metaphysical disciplines like astrology, as well as developments like the recent achievement published just last week in fusion, which is the holy grail of abundant, affordable energy. So Pluto in Aquarius is promising more of these radical breakthroughs, not just in science, but in thought. A new kind of reformation, actually.
Will we experience that in our own selves too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you have to remember the symbolism here, too, of Pluto and Scorpio, the phoenix rising from the ashes. So Pluto's transit through Aquarius is going to usher in a completely new era in human civilization that is comparable to the Age of Reason or the Industrial Revolution. In our own lives, in our own horoscopes, Pluto's transit through Aquarius shows, again, by the house in your horoscope that's ruled by Aquarius, where you personally can transform yourself, quote unquote, and therefore transform the world around you. This is your own personal latent power to release whatever beliefs no longer work for you or work in your favor or work for the well-being of the group. Letting these old archetypes die their natural deaths and embrace more evolved and advanced thinking and choices that look forward to a better and more equitable world of mutual respect and cooperation, not backward. So it's that kind of massive transformation, but on a very personal level. Look to your horoscope and see where transiting Pluto is going to be.
Well, let me throw one at you here, because you and I started this podcast a year ago in May. We were talking about that when you mentioned Jupiter. May, back to last spring. My equal sign Aquarius is on the 9th house. And then it moves to Pisces pretty quickly after that. The midheaven is on Pisces. Seems to me like that would be right in the position of this whole restructuring of spirituality.
And with you, Thomas, it's in your 9th house. So your own transformation, your own plutonic transformation is meant to be broadcast, the 9th house, media, publishing to a wider audience, and so on. So it's all media in the 9th house. It's all about information, and it's also the house of higher learning and teaching and philosophy and religion and so on. So you've got all of these disciplines and tools at your availability, everything from astrology to dream interpretation to anything else that's allied here. But the main thing is that you're putting it out there. I like to call you the Merv Griffin of metaphysics, as you know.
It's our little private joke. Then we've got to take care of these old bodies of ours because we want to hang around then for this transit. This is going to be great.
Speak for yourself. Bodies. I still live in amazement that at 78, I am in perfect health. I don't feel any older than I felt when I was 40. It's amazing to me, but it's the nature of my chart. Although, as you know, and I've said this to students too, without astrology, I would have been dead by now. True. Absolutely would have been.
You know, it seems to me like this Pluto transit for the conscious awake people who really want to participate in a spiritual renewal, this is going to be amazing. And we're going to be looking at the mundane almost with a, because we're going to have to let the populace slug it out and fight this battle between independence and authoritarianism while we're trying to raise the planet's spirituality. It's going to be an interesting mix, isn't it?
Yes, and it's not easy. It's not easy for me, Thomas. Believe me. I have to remind myself about the fundamentals. And this is what I do with astrology. To me, it's absolutely the world's best tool for self-development that I have ever come across.
And what does Pluto in Aquarius do for astrology itself over those 20 years?
Aquarius and Uranus, the old catchphrase is expect the unexpected. And astrologers will find the more you try and get specific with projections and predictions regarding Uranus, for example, it will be anything but what you said it would be.
But does astrology get more popular during this transit?
Oh, I think absolutely it does.
Do more people start to look in other places for spiritual solutions to answer their questions during this transit?
The thing about astrology that I love, anybody can do it. Anybody with a minimal amount of investment in time can start reading their horoscopes instantly. Now, if they find something of value in doing that, as I did right off the bat, they'll stay with it, because what intrigued me was, how does this old chart know that I have a scar on my left cheek from age 5? And that intrigued me to stay, well, if that's so, what else can I learn? What else? Well, here I am 58 years later, still learning and still exploring it, because it works. And it really does work on a very practical level, as we talked about, just making financial decisions. And so, in other words, absolutely predicting things. Yeah. You don't call it, I don't like to call it that, but it really is. Every time you read a chart, it's like a puzzle you're trying to figure out and help the client figure out, to assess the probabilities of getting what they want, or maybe having to delay that thing that they want until a better time, or giving them a heads up on what kind of obstacles and challenges to expect and when to expect them, so that they can work around them and keep going with their goals and so on. So it's just a very practical kind of tool, but it's also, to me, the best spiritual tool I've ever found for connecting with the inner realities, things up to and including things like past lives, for example, which you can never prove. But it's astonishing the correlations that you sometimes can make with a past life and definite experiences in this life. And usually when you do those kinds of connections with people, they will have an emotional experience when they hear them. And that's how you know that you've hit something that is true and valid and meaningful for them on that spiritual, non-physical level. So it's something that is useful on all sides of life, from very pragmatic to very exalted inner experiences.
You know, it sounds like on the higher side of the coin, the higher consciousness side of things, this next year is going to be a great year with lots of moving parts and pieces in our direction. So I'm looking forward to it. Hey, I know you put a lot into this in preparing for this, and thank you for giving us this particular look into ourselves, especially next year. Thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And if you'd like to connect with Robert in 2023, if you're listening to this in real time, you can find the link to that in our show notes. We have a Discord channel in there. We have a YouTube channel with all of his podcasts in their own playlist. All of that information is in the show notes for this episode, so hope you'll check that out. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again on the next Old Soul, New Soul Astrology podcast with Robert Glasscock.